793 AD. On a small island off the northeastern coast of England, monks gathered inside a quiet monastery known as Lindisfarne. For generations, life there had followed the same rhythm: prayer, work, study. The monastery was a place of peace, far removed from the violence and politics of the outside world. But on this day, something appeared on the horizon. Ships. Long, narrow vessels moving swiftly across the sea. At first, nobody was alarmed. Traders often traveled by ship. But as the vessels drew closer, it became clear that these men had not come to trade. They carried axes, swords, spears, round shields painted in bright colors. Their ships bore fearsome dragon heads carved into the wood. Within hours, the monastery was under attack. The treasures inside were looted. Buildings were burned. Monks were killed or taken away as slaves. The attackers vanished as quickly as they had arrived. Across Europe, news of the raid spread like wildfire. People were shocked. Who were these warriors? Where had they come from? And why had they struck without warning? The answer would terrify Europe for centuries. They were the Vikings. For nearly 300 years, Viking warriors would raid kingdoms, sack cities, conquer territories, and become some of the most feared people in history. But who were they really? And how did a relatively small population from Northern Europe leave such a massive mark on the world? This is the story of how the Vikings terrorized Europe for 300 years. The Vikings came from Scandinavia, the region that today includes Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Their homeland was beautiful but challenging. Long winters, rocky terrain, and limited farmland made life difficult. Most Vikings were not warriors. They were farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, and traders trying to survive in a harsh environment. But as populations grew, competition for land increased. Many young men saw little opportunity at home. At the same time, political rivalries and local conflicts encouraged ambitious leaders to seek wealth and power elsewhere. The sea offered a solution, and the Vikings became masters of it. Their greatest weapon was not the sword, it was the longship. The Viking longship was one of the most advanced vessels of its time. Lightweight and fast, it could travel across open oceans while also navigating shallow rivers. Unlike many other ships, longships could land directly on beaches. This gave the Vikings an enormous advantage. They could appear suddenly, strike quickly, and disappear before defenders could organize a response. To the people of Europe, Viking attacks seemed to come out of nowhere. One day, a village would be peaceful. The next, dragon-headed ships would appear on the horizon. Panic would spread. Church bells would ring. People would flee. But often, it was already too late. Monasteries became favorite targets. These religious centers contained valuable treasures such as gold, silver, and precious manuscripts. Most were lightly defended. For Viking raiders, they were easy targets. For Christian Europe, the attacks felt like divine punishment. Many people believed the end of the world might be near. As Viking raids increased, so did their reputation. Stories spread across Europe about fierce warriors from the north. Some tales exaggerated their brutality. Others described them as unstoppable monsters. The truth was more complicated. The Vikings were certainly skilled fighters. They trained with weapons from a young age. Axes were common because they were affordable and practical. Spears were widely used. Swords were valuable possessions often reserved for wealthier warriors. In battle, Vikings relied on discipline, aggression, and teamwork. Their shield walls could withstand enemy attacks while allowing them to advance together. But despite their fearsome image, the Vikings were not invincible. Many raids succeeded because they chose their targets carefully. They preferred locations that were wealthy but poorly defended. As their confidence grew, Viking ambitions expanded. They no longer wanted to simply raid Europe. They wanted to settle there. Beginning in the 9th century, Viking groups started establishing permanent communities outside Scandinavia. They settled parts of Ireland. They founded cities. They traded with local populations, and in some cases they became rulers. England became one of their most important targets. For decades, Viking armies launched repeated invasions. Then in 865 AD, a massive Viking force arrived. Known as the Great Heathen Army, it was far larger than most previous raiding groups. Its goal was not merely plunder, it was conquest. Kingdom after kingdom fell before the Viking advance. Large portions of England came under Viking control. The region known as the Danelaw emerged, where Viking laws and customs influenced daily life. For many English rulers, defeating the Vikings seemed impossible, but one king refused to surrender. His name was Alfred. Fought a long and difficult struggle against Viking invaders. At times, his kingdom appeared close to collapse. Yet he adapted. He reformed his defenses. He built fortified settlements. He improved military organization. Gradually, the balance began to shift. Alfred's efforts helped preserve Anglo-Saxon England and laid the foundation for future resistance against Viking expansion. Meanwhile, Viking influence spread far beyond Britain. They traveled along rivers deep into Eastern Europe. Swedish Vikings, often called Varangians, established important trade routes connecting northern Europe with the Byzantine Empire. Some eventually served as elite guards for Byzantine emperors. Others helped shape the early development of states that would later become Russia and Ukraine. Wherever they went, the Vikings adapted. They traded, they fought, they settled, and they left lasting cultural influences behind. Yet perhaps the most remarkable Viking achievements occurred not on battlefields, but on the open sea. The Vikings were extraordinary explorers. Using their longships and navigational skills, they ventured farther than most people of their era. They settled Iceland. They established colonies in Greenland. Then they pushed even farther west. Around the year 1000, a Viking explorer named reached North America. This happened nearly 5 centuries before crossing the Atlantic. The Vikings established a small settlement in what is now Canada. Although it did not last, the achievement demonstrated the incredible range of Viking exploration. Long before Europeans fully understood the Atlantic Ocean, Viking sailors had already crossed it. For all their successes, however, the Viking Age would not last forever. Over time, Europe began to change. Kingdoms grew stronger, defenses improved, armies became better organized. The surprise attacks that once made Vikings so dangerous became more difficult to execute. At the same time, Christianity spread throughout Scandinavia. Many Viking rulers converted. As Christian kingdoms emerged in the north, old traditions gradually faded. The culture that had fueled centuries of expansion was transforming. One of the final major events of the Viking Age occurred in 1066. That year, a Norwegian king named launched an invasion of England. Many historians consider him the last great Viking king. His campaign ended in defeat at the loss marked the symbolic end of the Viking Age. The era that had begun with the raid on Lindisfarne nearly 3 centuries earlier was finally coming to a close. Yet the Vikings did not disappear. Their descendants remained. Their settlements survived. Their influence endured. Today, traces of Viking culture can still be found across Europe and beyond. Many English words have Viking origins. Cities founded by Vikings continue to thrive. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal new details about their lives. Popular culture remains fascinated by Viking warriors, explorers, and legends. But perhaps the most important lesson about the Vikings is that they were far more than raiders. For generations, people remembered them mainly as brutal warriors who appeared from the sea. While violence was certainly part of their story, it was not the whole story. They were traders who connected distant regions. They were settlers who built communities. They were explorers who pushed the boundaries of the known world. They were shipbuilders whose innovations changed travel and warfare. And they were survivors who adapted to one of the harshest environments in Europe. The raid on Lindisfarne made the Vikings famous. Their achievements made them unforgettable. From the icy fjords of Scandinavia to the shores of North America, the Vikings left a legacy that stretched across continents. They terrified kingdoms. They challenged empires. They reshaped nations. And nearly 1,000 years later, their story continues to capture the imagination of the world. The dragon ships are gone. The Viking Age has ended, but the legend of the Vikings lives on.